I'm Sarisher Mann, and I'm the founder of the Sustainable Alpine Tourism Initiative. So for those of you that are new to joining a SATI session, I created SATI off the back of my research into sustainability leadership at Cambridge University. And I was looking at how we could really look to progress the circular economy in terms of alpine tourism, partly because I've been skiing and hiking most of my life. And I really wanted to try and look at whether there was a way to apply some of that research into alpine tourism and more broadly, more recently as well, mountain tourism, because I think many of the issues that we're seeing across alpine regions are also being replicated and felt in many other regions around the world as well, including in the US, including in South America, including in the Himalayas, and also other regions of Europe as well. And I know we've got quite a few people from the Nordics here today, so thank you so much everybody for joining. And just by way of a little bit of background of the project so far, so it started in September 2020 and really kicked off looking at how can we actually change the lens by which we look at sustainability in mountain regions. So rather than jumping straight to tourism, I looked at this from a slightly multidimensional lens of infrastructure, the outdoor sports industry, and also hospitality and the broader tourism stakeholders. And I think from my side, it was really that we wanted to bring a slightly more scientific, rigorous and actually economic lens onto this, partly because I work myself in sustainable finance for the French bank BNP Paribas. And when I look at this from the turning point of where we are in the industry, I think it feels to me very similar to where we were just before COP21 back in 2015, where you had this momentum of lots of stakeholders and a real willingness to try and progress sustainability, but essentially you needed quite a progressive roadmap. And I think the Paris Agreement for me really felt like that monumental moment. I remember being in Paris working for BNP at the time, and it felt like it was really this confluence of government coming together, corporates coming together, civil society, innovators, and also broader industry leaders as well. And I think this particular moment that we're in now in a post-COVID, or should I say COVID-impacted world, really, since we're all virtually working from home, feels like a very similar turning point where we actually have a moment to reset and rebuild tourism in a completely different way. And I think I thank all of the speakers that are here today for being part of that journey, because I think you're all doing things in your respective regions which are progressing a different form of sustainability and setting a very bold and ambitious roadmap for what's possible. So just a very quick plug for joining the SATI group as well. I think obviously we're all dialing in virtually from everywhere around the world today. And I think the key from my side is to keep you all connected. I think just as we would in a physical event, I think there would obviously be breakout networking sessions and you'd get to interact with your fellow audience members. So I do encourage you to join the LinkedIn group. Everything today will be synced with QR codes. So I've emailed you all a QR code reader, and I think it'd be great for you to connect with our speakers throughout the session, and I'd really encourage that mainly through LinkedIn and also through their websites too, but really do try and keep the dialogue alive, because I think from my side it's, you know, as much as I can bring you all together, I think a lot of that subsequent work comes from connecting across the different sectors and the different regions where you're all based. So do please connect today, and I strongly encourage that. And this particular QR code will link to the LinkedIn group so you can all stay connected. So our speakers today, and it brings me so much pleasure to introduce them all and really thank them all so much for their time today, because I think when I was putting this event together, I was looking primarily at what are mountain resorts of the future going to look like, and how can we set a very progressive and ambitious roadmap for some of the different types of not only technologies that we're looking at, but also broader approaches. And I think when I first started the SATI project, people said, you know, tourism, just speak to the tourism board. And I thought, well, yes, but actually tourism in many mountain regions is the economy, and therefore it's important to connect the stakeholders across the economy. And I think in the speakers that we've got here today, they're really taking that multi-stakeholder approach. I think often some of the issues that we face on sustainability, in particular on climate change and decarbonisation towards net zero, are very complex in terms of the types of stakeholders you have to onboard, and also the types of technology innovations that you have to implement. And I think all of our speakers here today are really at the forefront of showing that that's possible and having a very ambitious and clear roadmap to achieve that. So hopefully today you'll get some insight from them into some of those areas. So in terms of the panel today, we have Stephan Obenaus. So Stephan is actually a senior program co-manager of the energy and climate model regions of Zell, Kaprun, and he has a very experienced background as a sustainability professional, both in tourism and more broadly outside as well. Studied in lots of different countries, and also has a real wealth of knowledge in terms of some of the levers required to transition areas to sustainability, and has quite a bold ambition, I would say, in his approach as well. I think Stephan, our conversations have been very much going beyond the potential greenwashing risks as well, and talking quite concretely about some of the solutions that are possible. So really excited to have you on the panel today. We also have Michael Mathres, who is the founder of Verbier Zero, and he's actually launching Verbier Zero today, and really excited to welcome you, Michael, to the panel as well. I think Michael's a seasoned sustainability expert, but also is very closely linked to sustainable finance and has a real wealth of knowledge in terms of some of the different types of organizations that you have to onboard to actually try and push sustainability from academia to corporates to policymakers. I think Michael's got a really interesting perspective on that, and I think really excited to hear more about Verbier Zero today as well. We've also got Svea Lauterjung, who is from Werfenweng Activ and is also based in Austria, and Svea is really looking at the forefront of sustainable mobility, and I think Werfenweng in particular has been a really strong blueprint for what's possible in terms of sustainable mobility. And I know that I, for example, at the moment, I'm talking to quite a few mountain regions in the UK to see what can we learn from Werfenweng's approach as well, because I think the types of sustainability actions that you've taken are really progressive, and people can learn from them across multiple regions as well. Amazing facilitators today. Really excited to welcome Kelly Coombes, who is a climate strategy expert and also does a lot of work on biodiversity, a lot of work on climate risk, has a background in the insurance industry. So I think that's, again, quite an interesting perspective on how you can bring the financial sector into this discussion as well. And last but not least, you have Danielle Boiston, who is a sustainability expert with multiple years of experience actually working with the World Economic Forum. And Danielle is currently really specialised in sustainable tourism, looking at some of the levers there, both on the community side and also across different corporates as well, and works very closely with Protect Our Winters too. So yeah, really interesting panel today, and I think welcome you all to connect with them and be part of the conversation. So just a very quick plug on the highlights report. If I mentioned that earlier, but if any of you want to access that, do feel free to scan this QR code and it will take you to some of the highlights from last year. And in particular, looking at for today, the decarbonisation dialogue. I think there was a lot of stuff on infrastructure. So if you're interested in some of the conversations we had then, do feel free to go to there and then find out more information. So Stephan, I think we're going to start with you today in terms of hearing a little bit more about the climate and energy model region. So Zell is a town that's based about an hour from Salzburg in Austria. And essentially what's quite interesting is that you're managing a program that is, for the first time, I guess, looking at tourism through the lens of this particular policy accelerator, really. And I wondered if you could share a bit about the story of the climate and energy model region project that you're working on, and also what do you see as the key priorities of the resort for the future as well?
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and hello everybody from Zell. You can't see it in my screen as you can on Michael's screen, but it's a beautiful day out there in Zell. We have the most beautiful time of the year. It's spring in the valley, winter in the mountains. It's amazing. And what else can I say? What makes me happy is to work on a program or a project like the Klima- und Energie Modellregionen, which is, it's funny that in your running order, you are asking for the history of the program, because we just started actually. Like we started in early 2021. It was a long process from the invitation to to get into that program, to get the promotion, to work on it. Actually, it's a federal program, which means it's federally funded by the Climate and Energy Fund in Austria. And this is not brand new because there are more than 100 climate and energy model regions out there in Austria. But what is really the key to the Pioneer project is that it's the first approach to set up a model and a climate and energy model region, especially for tourism. Which means that there was the search for creating an outstanding region, which is internationally well known actually for its touristic program and for its natural resources. And and that was the key for us to apply for that program, because we said Zell Kaprun is quite well situated for a program like that, or for a project like that. What I mean is that what's another key for that is that you need strong communities in the region to apply for that program. And we have two communities in that region together. It's the community of Zell and it's the community of Kaprun. And both of them were assigned to implement the CAM program over 3 years by getting the promotion for that project. Which means that we are a team in the CAM management of more people, but we like the management function we share. It's Sebastian Fitztum. I don't know if he's here right now. I sent him the invitation, and we kind of share the management. But we are more than reliable on strong communities in the background. But this will be part of your second question, I guess. Which brings me to the major 3 areas or sectors of our program. Like in our concept of the project, we want to effect in the next 3 years. We focused on 3 major sectors. The biggest one is mobility. It's like we will hear more detail about mobility and tourism in Werfenweng. I guess Werfenweng has years of experience. We've just started with that, but still mobility is our core factor. It's our core sector. The second one is the building and infrastructure sector, which means that we are really we just started. That's what already started an intense consulting offensive for companies in the region to give them quite advice about the energy sector, how to save energy, how to be energy effective, how to be more energy effective, how to invest in photovoltaic power on their roofs, how to invest in charging stations for e-bikes and e-cars or something like that, and how to make major steps in terms of changing the old heating systems with new energy effective heating systems, how to install heat pumps instead of oil and gas heating systems, for example. The third sector is the procurement of regional products in the region. Like it's really amazing for us how big the source of regionally produced products we have in our region, and we really want to give them a marketplace which is here for the companies or for the touristic companies in the region to set up short supply chains and how to reduce delivery routes on their products they need in their daily business. And like this is an overview of the 3 major steps. Like what I forgot before, like the biggest part, the mobility sector, is where we can learn a lot from Werfenweng as well, is we want to implement, we want to promote the carless holidays, the carless arrival and the departure in our region, because we have a big advantage in Zell. We have the train station right in the middle of the center. Like for those of you who know Zell, this is a big advantage we really want to use. We really want to promote this this opportunity for guests, nationally, international guests as well, to arrive in our region by train. And at the same time, we have to set up like a big infrastructure of mobility services on site, because what we see is that the carless holiday or the carless arrival and departure only work if you have a big service site that you can use, so you don't have to be in the position of having less of comfort, mobility comfort. And what the region already installed here is the mobility card, which works quite well. And this is only one stepstone we really want to work more close on to to give our guests the chance to arrive in our beautiful region without being like dependent on their cars, actually.
Mm. No, I think that's brilliant. I think in everything that you've said with those three particular focus areas, there's so much that we could all take on board and learn from. I think what I love in what you said also is the joint sharing with lots of other regions, because I think that's quite critical from my perspective to this dialogue, is this inter-regional knowledge sharing. And I think on some of the levers that you said, I definitely concur that it's quite critical. I think the supply chain in particular is one that's very underestimated, actually, from an impact perspective. And I know that on my own thesis, I looked at how to accelerate circular economy, and it's a very specific title, family-owned hotels in Zell am See, Kaprun. And I found that the supply chain lever was very important, because actually hotels in particular have quite large negotiating power with suppliers if they can collaborate together. And also the types of levers that you can implement are reducing the CO2 distributional footprint through bundling deliveries, take back schemes to reduce plastic waste. There's a lot of different things that are available to address in that space. And I think it's fantastic that through the program that you're running with Zell am See Kaprun, that you're actually going to accelerate many of those particular collaborations, really. So yeah, really excited to hear a bit more.
So.
You'd hope so. I think it's definitely on a starting trajectory, which is great. So this takes me really nicely actually onto Michael. So Michael, you've been a real pioneer in Switzerland in terms of sustainability leadership, and I know that you've really did a Herculean effort at bringing lots of stakeholders together to launch Verbier Zero. So we wanted to hear a bit about what is Verbier Zero. Can you tell us a bit about the vision for Verbier Zero and the kind of roadmap ahead and the plan that you foresee with the project?
Yes, thank you, Sarisher, for inviting me to this wonderful session. And hello, everyone from beautiful Verbier. So, yes, just a bit of context with regards to why I'm doing or launching Verbier Zero. I just moved to Verbier actually 5 months ago, although I've been coming here as a kid since for the last 30 years. I've decided that, you know, finally I'm a mountain man, so I've decided to move here in Verbier. And so, of course, when you come here, you try to figure out, you know, does Verbier, does the community share, you know, your values? I'm a sustainability and climate finance expert. I've been doing this for 20 years. And so my ambition was to really, you know, bring all this, you know, experience to Verbier and apply it in a constructive and positive way so that Verbier can fully integrate sustainable values to fight climate change, in particular here in the mountains. So what I did was I've been thinking a lot. I've been thinking a lot and talking a lot to a lot of stakeholders over the last 4 months. And basically, I came up to this conclusion, which is Verbier Zero. So Verbier Zero stands for obviously zero carbon, zero plastic, and zero pollution. What is it? Well, it's a not-for-profit association here based in Verbier. And its mission is really to protect Verbier's nature and preserve its future. So the way we've decided, you know, I have a small group of people that I'm working here with to do it, is that we wanted to do three things. Number one is we wanted to bring something that is globally accepted and recognizable to Verbier. I mean, it's you know, it's the only way to basically engage in a discussion with people here locally. If you want to impose something of yourself personally, it's very hard to do it if it's not done in other parts of the world. Secondly, it had to be easily, you know, acceptable by stakeholders. It has to be easily understandable, easily acceptable, and also easily, you know, achievable. And the third criteria that we discussed is obviously the sustainability of the initiative, but more importantly, the replicability of the initiative. Would it be possible to apply a model here in Verbier so that other ski stations, mountain resorts could copy and replicate in their own resort? So we came up with three objectives that we're offering, and this is what, you know, we're launching today. Number one is that to be able to achieve anything, you need to understand and be able to measure, you know, the size of the problem that you are currently facing. So there's no other way to do it rather than having a carbon footprinting. So the first part that we're going to focus on is the climate plan. So establish a climate plan with Verbier, obviously with both the operating company here in Verbier and also the tourist board. The second part is a zero, what we call the zero campaign. So it's an educational and communication campaign to educate the people here and businesses about zero, you know, what is zero carbon life looks like and how to adapt to it. Can you live without plastics? You know, and how are we able to reach these zero targets altogether? And the third part, and that's a little more, it's not complex to me because I'm a finance guy, but it's to implement a carbon fund. So a zero carbon fund that will be funded by donors, but also stakeholders here to be able to fund and sponsor any projects that help us enable to mitigate our carbon emissions and also adapt the population here in Verbier. So these are the three elements that we're planning to offer and launch. The way that we're going to do it is that we're doing a crowdfunding campaign in the first week of June to reach our first target for the budget of 2021. We have an objective of reaching 25,000 Swiss francs. This will enable us to basically put in place these three elements that I've just discussed and talked about. That's about it. Was there another question?
No, that's great. And I think what's really interesting in what you say is the rigor of the approach in terms of the roadmap. And by that, I mean the fact that I know you're working really closely with some really great climate scientists on the modeling side and looking at how you can actually bring some of that very established climate modeling in terms of a transition of a town and of a region into the roadmap of what you're trying to create. The other thing I would say, which is very interesting, is the potential to have quite a lot of learning of solutions that might exist in other regions as well, and bring that intel into Verbier in terms of some of the solutions that you're looking at with the carbon fund. And I think what's really, really interesting is the idea that you're not just looking at carbon, you're also looking at waste and plastic and the broader I guess air pollution issue as well, which people kind of underestimate actually when it comes to a lot of the dynamics at play in terms of sustainable development from the environmental side in many mountain regions. The other thing I think that's very, very interesting is the fact the way that you kind of have built this project? Because I think, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of the community engagement and the types of stakeholders you're bringing in, but I think there's a lot of really quite inspiring processes that you're implementing, which others could learn from as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us, and we'll definitely touch upon that a little bit more later as well. So this takes us beautifully onto Svea. So Svea, I know that obviously Werfenweng is a real leader when it comes to sustainability, very much focused on mobility. So we wondered if you could share your insights into the soft mobility approach, and in particular how tourists actually engage with that, because I know that it's definitely a real benchmark for what's possible and achievable when it comes to this integration of sustainable mobility and the strategy of a resort.
Yeah, hello everybody. Actually, I'm not in Werfenweng right now, but I'm here with you from Salzburg. The weather is also very nice, so I'm looking forward to go outside. To talk about the approach of Werfenweng, I start with the initial idea for this mountain village, because when tourism evolved in Werfenweng in the early 90s, people came up. There was a big process of how do we want to develop this village, this mountain region towards a really tourism destination, because back then there were only a few hosts and no real tourism infrastructure. So they had this vision process and came up with the idea of having a completely car-free village. So that was the initial idea. As some of you might know, Zermatt, for example, you stop your car in front of the village and then you just get around by horse-drawn carriages, shuttle, or just walk your way through the city. Of course, that was a very, so to say, savage idea. If you already have people living there and they're used to using cars and just stopping in front of their door, so they didn't get through with this idea. But instead of forcing that, the other idea was, okay, let's make using public transport and other means of transport than your private car more attractive and benefit and reward people for doing that. So they were looking at the needs of tourists at first. So we have this big advantage of having 2 train stations with long distance services in the area. So we have to make sure how to get people from these train stations that are located 10 to 12 kilometers from Werfenweng to our destination. And to do that, to secure this last mile, you have to come up with a service that is very convenient for the tourists, because they have a long train journey and they just feel like they want to drop off their luggage and get to their host very quick, and they don't feel like using normal transport, public transport. Maybe they have to wait another hour. That is not convenient. They will never use that. So the service that you implement needs to be very, very quick and very convenient to use. So they came up with this idea for a shuttle service. Basically, it's running on a timetable, and it's only running if you give it a call 1 hour in advance. So people who travel to Werfenweng, they get this information. You come in with this train, 10 minutes later, there's a shuttle service running up to Werfenweng. Just give us a call, we pick you up. And then we're not going to drop you off at any station within the village, but we drop you off right in front of your door of the host. And for the way back to the train station, it works the other way around. And throughout the years, of course, that's a service that you have to explain, especially this give someone a call so it picks you up and it's not a taxi, and you don't have to pay the price of a taxi, because still it's collecting people on the way. So there might be 2-3 other passengers on the bus with you, or we ran this with this big Volkswagen vans. So it's something that you need to explain to tourists as well as to hosts, and it needs to be very reliable so that people really start to use it and to trust in that the host itself, because that's the touch point with the tourist. They need to promote it. Otherwise, we as the tourism organization, we will not get hold of the tourist, and we are not at this point in the information chain to catch them. The host needs to trust us and trust the service to then promote it to the tourists. So that's the very important thing about it. And then if you have secured these last mile, you have to look at, okay, how do people move within the area? So what is the maybe the sites or the places that they want to go to in the area or in the like perceived destination, and how do they get there and how do they move around in our small village? So there's services as, for example, trips that we organize to Salzburg or to this ice cave that we have in the area, because we know people want to go there during their stay. And so we, instead of having everybody driving there on their own, we organize big buses 2 times a week, and they will drive them there. So they just come up to our tourism office, book it with us, and then they know, okay, we're leaving Friday morning at 9 and I'm going to be back at 6 in the afternoon or whatever. And the other thing to get around in town is that we have a shuttle service or a taxi that is running on no schedule. So basically it's like working like a taxi, but for our guests, it's included in their holiday. So wherever they want to go, it might be for going out for dinner, or they come back from a hike and they don't feel like walking anymore. They can be picked up and they will be driven home or to whatever place they want to go to. And the other pillar that we implemented is, if there's people that really feel like they need more independence and they don't want to go to this like famous points that we covered with our trips, they can rent electric cars from us. So there's a fleet of 9 electric cars that we have financed through the tourism destination organization, and they can book it or rent it from us, and then they can go wherever they want to go within the area of Salzburger Land or even further. Then they of course have to take care of the charging. But yeah, that's the big offers that we have. And for the past years, and what we now is try to use more is the e-bikes. So we used to rent them out for the past years already, but now we want to make them more a real mean of transport. So it's not just to like try an electric bike and maybe cycle up the hill, but to get to places and to get to touristic sites, so that you can explore in the area with another mean of transport.
I think that's fantastic, and it's fantastic in the way that you explained it, because you kind of show that at every point in a tourist journey, you've kind of thought about this way of integrating a better means of mobility. And it's interesting, actually. Do please keep the questions coming in on the chat, by the way, everyone, because I think we're going to move to Q&A in around 15 minutes or so. But I think it's interesting in what you say about the level of convenience in terms of the tourists still having a good service and getting to where they want to go, but doing that in a very different way. And actually I've used the Eisriesenwelt shuttle before. In fact, I've only ever really gone there via public transport, because it is just so efficient, the service that Werfenweng has put together. And I think this concept that you explained of the last mile, and then whilst you're actually in the area, is quite an interesting way to look at this, because I think you can overcome a lot of the hurdles that people think about in terms of the mobility access. I know that especially on EV rental, I mean, I've turned up at Salzburg and it's close to impossible sometimes a couple of years ago to get an EV. Whereas I guess once you're there, you arrive by train, you then kind of get the shuttle, then you might kind of need something, but you'd much prefer to have an electric vehicle. And I think it's great that you've integrated that as part of that soft mobility, smart mobility, model. So yeah, I really commend you guys and the town for taking that very progressive forethought, I guess, in terms of not compromising on the user experience, but also adding a real USP as to why it's important to go via a different kind of transport that is much more sustainable. And the e-bikes is a really interesting area of growth as well. And we'll touch upon that very briefly soon. This brings me really nicely into Stephan, and I know we're slightly tighter on time than we would have anticipated, so I think might have to be a quick 3 minutes on this one instead of 5, unfortunately. But when we're thinking of the Chem region in particular, I know that Svea touched upon this a little bit in terms of the tourists, but which are the key stakeholders that really need to be engaged on the transition towards net zero and the transition to make resorts more sustainable? I know that you work across a spectrum of lots of different types of stakeholders, but in the CHEM project, who are the key ones that you're really bringing together, and how can we kind of learn from that?
What I've learned so far is that the one major part here are strong communities who really stand behind the idea of creating something new in terms of infrastructure and mobility services, because all that has to be set up as well. So it's not only a concept; it should be effective in the next couple of years. So we need strong communities who really want to do that. At the same time, we need a strong tourism organization in the region, who realizes that sustainability is a future topic worth engaging in. And at the same time, we need the tourism organization and all the experience and professionalism there to promote that topic and to do the right marketing, to stand behind that idea. What we have in the region, what is another major key, is like pioneers in the region, really big companies that have lots of experience in the terms of energy efficiency. In our region, these are the cable car companies. We have two major cable car companies. It's the Kitzsteinhorn company and it's the Schmittenhöhe, and we can learn a lot from those companies because they have done a lot. So we really want to incorporate a know-how and experience transfer from those big companies to the other companies. A really big, huge backbone of the program are the companies, the smaller tourism companies in the region. Speaking of the procurement, we need producers of food and beverage, and we need companies to incorporate that idea. And at the same time, it's the inhabitants and the residents, people who, it's not only about the guests and not only about the tourists, it's about the people in the region. For example, we want to set up a network of e-bike infrastructure, which can be used, speaking of mobility on site, which can be used by inhabitants and residents people as well, so they can reduce their carbon footprint on a daily basis, driving or riding a bike to work or to shopping or something else. And last but not least, we need the CHEM management team where all the threads come together. And we need visionaries and thought leaders in the region who really want to work on new ideas. And therefore, we have the Climate and Energy Fund in Austria as a really strong partner. We set up we are in the middle of an advisory board set up by the Climate and Energy Fund, and we are more than happy to get here really good contacts to do great networking with other regions, because we have two other CHEM regions around our region. Hello to Alois, by the way. And we can learn from those regions as well. So we try to set up a huge network of people engaging in the topic of sustainable development, not only in tourism, but especially in tourism when it comes to the CHEM model region, Zell am See, Kaprun.
I think there's so much of what you said resonates with me in terms of the levers. I think the big companies is a very interesting one, because I think when you look at something like circular economy, for example, when you try to move from a linear model of production and consumption to a circular one, we were playing around with this concept of, okay, well, you take an issue and then you look at how to try and solve that through circular economies. For example, X rental skis. We know that at the end of a season, X amount of skis are going to get either sent to somewhere outside of Europe to be recycled or partly to social projects. And yet you say that's a massive material loss in the system. So maybe we could make circular economy cool by partnering with a very large ski company that produces in the area, a large rental company who has clearly quite a large operational footprint, a concrete company, an infrastructure company that we know is making material for those big cable cars that you just mentioned in terms of pillars. And then finally, you make it really cool and you get a bunch of skiers, famous skiers, to come and sign it, or boarders for that matter, both to come and sign it. And then suddenly you end up saying, let's make a type of resort which not only from the production perspective of circular economy is very resilient, but also from the consumer side, it's very cool, and it suddenly becomes something that you go and see, right? Like in Singapore, people go and see lots of sites which are actually very progressive from a carbon sequestration perspective and sustainability perspective. You suddenly apply a similar mentality to places in the Alps. And I think in what you're doing in the CHEM, there's so much potential for that kind of inter-organisation and inter-sector innovation. I also think what you mentioned about the community is so critical. I think a lot of the people that we have on the call here today are really at the forefront of the community engagement. And I think so often when people think of the transition dialogues, it's a lot of siloed conversations. So you have the policymakers speaking in one area, you have corporate speaking in another, and you might have startups and innovators and then NGOs in another. And I think what's great about the CHEM is that you're bringing that whole stakeholder supply chain, I guess, together. And I think it's fantastic to see what the result of that will be, I guess, in the coming months and years ahead. I think I'm going to move very briefly on to Michael. I'm conscious of the time, and I think we definitely want some time for Q&A. I can see some questions coming in on the chat, and do please keep them coming in. Michael, from your side, I guess I know that Stephan just mentioned community engagement, but what do you see as the importance of community engagement in terms of the creation of Verbier Zero? And I know that on the carbon fund in particular, I think that sounds like it's going to involve quite a strong influence of community interest being addressed, and I wonder how important do you see that for a quick kind of 2 minutes before we move to Svea for the closing question.
Okay, I'm going to try to be very, very quick. So two things. Number one, so yes, you know, the mountain resorts, although we're all facing, you know, similar challenges and so forth, we're all different. And so even here in Verbier, you know, the ski resort here is different than the, you know, we're the main entry to the Four Valleys, to the Quatre Vallées, which is, you know, the largest ski resort in Switzerland. The ski resort, you know, in the next valley is different than the one in the next valley and so forth. What am I trying to say? You have to respect the sensitivities and the sensibilities of the cultural and the historical and the political aspects of your ski resort. If you don't understand them and you don't accept them, then educate yourself about that, because at the end of the day, you're going to be dealing with them on a daily and weekly basis. And then in terms of trying who you're trying to target, or at least, you know, in our case, I think this is where there's a commonality perhaps with all mountain resorts. There's an operating company, usually. There's a tourist board, usually, or a tourist agency, whatever you want to call it. And then there's, of course, the communal. There's the government. So here it's the communal government. So you have to, you know, you have to integrate these three in a constructive discussion. If you can't include those, you know, this trifecta, it's going to be very, very hard to push anything forward from a political point of view, operating point of view, or economical point of view with regards to tourism. And the three things that, you know, I had to make sure that, you know, I sort of, you know, yes, it's nice to bring 20 years of experience and, you know, globally from sustainability and climate finance, but, you know, at the end of the day, I'm not a tourist expert. Okay, I've never worked in the tourism industry, so you have to bring the right partners to the table. And I'm happy that you know, I've been able to talk to a great organization called Green Destinations, and they are on board as the main tourist partner to help us a globally recognized work and seal and standard and certification that they can implement here, you know, in Verbier and discuss with the tourist board. Secondly, I'm also happy that my climate partner is actually called Climate Partner. It's a carbon and climate consultancy that's now over Europe. So then, you know, then I can show to the commune and to the operating company that we're able to, you know, measure their carbon footprint and apply an MRV system, and then be able to measure their progress. And then, of course, you mentioned the carbon fund. So that's basically me. So because I'm an expert in that. And so, of course, I will need to work with a local bank. But I've been talking to a few banks here. And so that's the way we've approached it. And that's the way we're suggesting.
And I think in what you've just said, you've also brilliantly answered Pauline's question, actually, in terms of the types of activities that you're planning to do to achieve that. I think there was a specific question on waste. I don't know if you want to briefly address that on the waste front, because I can see that came in on the chat. And also around the implementation of the traffic reduction. I think 2 questions coming in the chat for you there, Michael. I think we'll quickly address those before we move on to Svea, because there's a question for Svea as well.
So sorry, I didn't understand the question.
The question was around, so there's one on how you plan to achieve the zero waste, so more on, I guess, the circularity side, and then a question around the reduction in vehicle traffic and how you see this being implemented. I guess I might say a quick note on the zero waste. I think a lot of the solutions that we're looking at in SATI would also be highly relevant for Verbier Zero to look at, and I know that you and I are talking very closely in terms of sharing some of those stakeholder key contacts, really. I think that's a key part of SATI for me anyway, is to try and bridge some of those solutions across different regions. But I don't know if you want to address that and elaborate a little bit further.
Sure. So the great thing about waste, especially here in Verbier, is that it's you can measure it. You can measure the waste that is emitted by the whole of the community and all the tourists here during winter, and also see the waste that is all on the mountains during the summer. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with the commune to figure out, how much waste is actually, how much waste there is during the winter and during the summer. Secondly, we'll figure out, how to communicate that in a positive and constructive way to the inhabitants and to the stakeholders, such as the tourist board. And thirdly, I don't have the solutions, and we'll figure out, what solutions we can implement with the fund to either sponsor or invest in, whether it's a technology, whether it's an initiative to bring the waste down to zero. There is a person here who is working on this, and also there's a lot of projects locally that we can look at. And in terms of the traffic, those numbers, we have to do a survey once again with regards to the cars that do come here. But we will have to measure that as well. And it's the same process: measure, communicate, and then solve.
And I think what's great in your approach is that you've got a real open-mindedness to some of the solutions. I know that you and I have spoken quite a lot about some of the things going on in France in terms of circularity and reduction of waste. And actually, for anyone that's interested, it's worth checking out the previous SATI that we had in, March. I think it feels like a blur already. The one that we had at the end of March, because we had a great speaker called Sabrina Vitasari, who's from New Cycle, and actually one of her colleagues is in this call today. So it's worth checking that out, because she's actually developed, her and Maria and the rest of the team have developed a circular waste solution in terms of offsets, and I think that's quite an interesting way to bring that into the corporate supply chain world in terms of looking at circularity at a mountain region level as well. And that's quite an interesting link there with some of the technologies. Actually, I'm going to move to Svea, because we have a question for you, and I did originally have a question for you, but I'm going to try and merge the two together. So we had a question from Alois around the numbers of visitors arriving by public transport. Has this kind of changed? How have you seen that? And then more broadly, looking ahead, I wanted to very quickly ask you, how do you see the evolution of the approach to sustainability in Werfenweng? I know that you're looking a little bit at looking at how to connect tourists more with nature and some of those experiential offers, I guess, that you have, but I wondered, how do you see success of the project so far, and also looking ahead, how do you think it will evolve?
To look at the numbers or the percentage of people traveling by train to Werfenweng, in average, to the people who travel to Austria by train is a little bit more in summer than it is in winter, but if you look at the more city destinations, it's 7 to 10% that travel by train. If you have the really like land side destinations, it's more like around 5%. In Werfenweng, we're not looking at 2020, of course, because people now again love their cars and feel very safe using their cars. But in general, it's around 20% that travel to Werfenweng by train in the past years, and we hope to get back to that and get even better on that rate in the next years. To go to your second question, of course, we started this path of sustainability and of green traveling in the 90s, and once you started it, you have to keep on going and come up with new ideas, because people will focus on it more and more, and now more than ever, because it's this huge trend now. So we have to come up, we feel like we have to, and we want to come up with new things and looking at new topics. And one of that is, of course, the energy for us. So yeah, all these ideas of Verbier and also Zell are very interesting for us as well, because we feel like we're just starting to touch these topics, and one approach that we have is to work on that in this group of alpine birds. I don't know if you heard of these destinations that focus. They up until now they all focused on mobility in different terms, but now we feel like we have to evolve there as well, and maybe we can come up with another cooperation, or like evolve that more towards energy saving and green energy. And also a big topic is, of course, waste management and regional products. So I think we all have the same topics. It's just like, where do you put your focus on? And that is so we're not done with mobility, and we want to move on there, of course, but we have to touch other topics as well.
Sure. I sort of see it as a bit of a matrix of lots of different levers that a resort needs to look at. And I think all of you have a slightly different lens by which you analyze this. I think there's the carbon lens, there's the circular economy aspect, there's mobility, there's supply chain, there's lots of levers that we're looking at, and I think it's great that we can bring you all together to kind of discuss this today as well. I'm conscious of the time, so I think we have addressed quite a few of the questions that came in on the chat, so I'm going to move across to introducing our facilitators before we move to the breakout sessions in a moment. So delighted to welcome Kelly and Danielle, as I mentioned earlier. So Kelly, I'm just going to give you a quick minute or so, and Danielle to say a quick hello, and also I'll just briefly explain how the breakout sessions work. So basically you'll see a message on the screen that says join breakout. You just press join and you'll be taken to one of the breakout rooms facilitated by one of the three of us, and we'll be looking specifically today at the sustainability priorities of resorts in terms of some of those levers that we just mentioned, the challenges in terms of onboarding stakeholders, and also broadly more challenges as well. These might be technological, these might be political, these might be financial. I'd love to get your thoughts on that in the breakout sessions. And finally, how we can scale up solution sharing across regions as well, because I think that's quite a key part of SATI as well. We probably won't get to cover all three in the breakout, but I think hopefully we'll have quite an interesting discussion. So Kelly, I'm just going to welcome you to unmute and give a quick intro, and then the same with Danielle.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kelly, and I'm pleased to be back at SATI. I've done a few question and answer kind of moderator support in this area, but it's I really appreciate the collaboration. So I do echo what Sarisher said, is that, you know, stay in touch, because I think there's so many great ideas that are happening across in your local regions in this space. It's nice to know everybody that's popping up. But I work in climate risk management for companies, helping them pivot as we all need to kind of move to carbon, you know, net zero. What does that mean for companies and their strategy in the long term? So instead of looking at 5 years, we look at like 10 to 30 years time, quite long term, and how to put your minds around that from a business perspective. And that's me.
Amazing. And I think what's interesting about that time horizon is that often some of those net zero targets in particular are looking between 10 and kind of 20 years out. And so I think, yeah, that's super important, I guess, for this particular transition of resorts in terms of analysing that. And Danielle, I'm going to welcome you to also introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can move to the breakout rooms in a moment.
Hello, everybody, and yes, thank you very much, Sarisher, for inviting me along today. So yeah, I'm a Brit living in the French Alps now for over 20 years. I originally trained as a geographer doing research into the impacts of severe weather for the UK Environment Agency. And I worked at the meteorological office over there before moving to France and getting into the exciting world of event management. However, my eco-anxiety at so much international travel led me to champion more sustainable events at the World Economic Forum, and indeed the ISO 2012-1 certification for our annual meeting in Davos. The recent pandemic has been for me a really good reset opportunity, just in order actually to focus more into the field of sustainability, stepping away from physical events. And I've gone back to school and I'm studying sustainable hospitality management in Switzerland at the Sustainable Management School in Gland. And as you mentioned, Sarisher, I'm particularly passionate about mountain environment because of also my involvement with Protect Our Winters, with whom I've been on the board since 2017. And basically, I've always got my eyes out on more ways to be sustainable in travel, tourism and the event sector. And I'm a huge fan of what you're doing here. So clearly bringing people together is one of the best ways forward. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you in our breakout groups.
Amazing. And I can't thank you enough for supporting today and for bringing this dialogue together. I think it's really great to work with all of the panelists and also our facilitators as well. So Danielle first to come and give a quick debrief. I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so I think a quick 2-minute debrief from your side on what was the kind of key takeaways of the room and what you found quite interesting would be great, and then I'll welcome Kelly to do the same as well.
With pleasure. So the first question was, what do you think should be the top sustainability priorities for resorts of the future? And first up, we had Jim talking about energy savings, building an infrastructure, insulation in resorts. Gavin mentioned transportation, so that's a continuation of what we've already heard with regard to cable cars and connecting tourists with electric fleets, and making air quality as well something which is really on the agenda. Catherine talked about the community engagement and really the importance of getting everybody on your board and all year round as well. And that it should be also the tour operators taking some responsibility to educate the guests, which was quite an interesting take on that and took us then on to the next question of challenges. And actually, Marco, he had to leave us, but he mentioned building sustainability into business models. So really at the base with operations and marketing. So then the next question, which stakeholders do you think are key to on board when it comes to the acceleration of sustainability roadmaps in resorts, and what challenges need to be addressed? So here we started with Svea talking about including big hotel chains, and Catherine mentioning the schools, the young people, also visitors, them needing to see the impact and not just coming and going out again. Lucy mentioned that we should really be also listening to those who are speaking up the loudest. In other words, finding those grassroots organisations where the energy is and approaching them. And Fru, who is coming from a tour operator side, actually said that's some part of the challenge is getting to the right people in the community, and for her coming in from the outside, you know, who to talk to. So we then had a nice opportunity to share some contacts. Gavin had lots of very good company names and people who are doing things at all different levels. And not just therefore focusing on the tourist offices or the chalet companies, but also these groups who are emerging and rapidly emerging across the Alps. And then we even had a bit of time to look at the third question, which was...
Oh my goodness, it's a highly efficient group that you were leading there.
Great participants. How do we scale up the sharing of solutions across the mountain regions? So on this, we talked very much about the importance of networks and really going through the idea of, yes, it's nice to take an example, for example, Verbier, what's going to be happening there and sharing it across regions, but bearing in mind that what works in one area and one country might not culturally work or be able to be adopted in another resort. And finally, Lucy mentioned also the engaging on a macro level. So going from grassroots, but not ignoring the political level as well, and working to come in from both directions. So I hope that covers everything that everybody said pretty much. It was a really great group, and I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to meet with them.
And thank you so much. I thought that was such a brilliantly comprehensive takeaways of what you discussed. And I think thank you so much for leading that session. I think feedback's great as well. I can see that lots of people are really happy to connect and really great to be part of that group. And Kelly, I'm going to move on to you as well. I think you'll probably have some quite similar areas, maybe in terms of some of the levers that Danielle spoke about and some of the issues. So I'll welcome you to elaborate on that a little bit too.
Yes, agreed. I think we have a lot of similarities. I think that the conversation that we've seen kind of has moved on quite rapidly in the past 12 to 24 months. Danny, if you want to do us a favor and all those connections and sharing of contacts that you've got, maybe Sarisher, if we could put those in the LinkedIn chat so that everybody's got them. Definitely. I think that would be great. I think from kind of how things need to be actioned, I suppose a lot of conversation was around, you know, carbon and waste is a problem. It's a challenge in itself, but people need to get engaged from the tour operators to be able to kind of support the information coming into the people that are visiting, but as well, you need to get the communities involved to really kind of live that understanding. And I think that there's already a lot of development in that area, but it's just making sure that the people who know that when they're visiting, that they actually are respective of that. And then part of that is also getting all levels of the community involved in that, like even the young children and within the schools, and making sure that it becomes part of the conversation that's going on so that the future knows how to protect the area and the space. I think that there was a lot of interest around, I suppose, yeah, I guess that's it. We've talked about it all. The composting was something that came in as well too, that there's
interesting.
You know, that a lot of waste can maybe actually be better recycled. If there's a recycling program, it can be done better. Like, so just tweaking, not tweaking, but ramping up the initiatives that are already there, and then educating people about how to engage with them.
Amazing.
And that's about it,
I think there's some overlap. That's fantastic. There's some overlap there on the group that I was in as well, especially on the idea of the community involvement. I think we spoke quite a lot about the need to raise awareness and actually educate people, but make them feel part of the solutions is critical so that you do get that long-term buy-in. I think there were some really interesting examples of circular economy initiatives that were going on that were shared, and Dom from Protect Our Winters and Maria from New Cycle as well had shared quite a few of those. I think the interesting thing as well was around how we can actually look at having a more optimistic narrative around this. One thing that struck me quite a lot was the fact that sustainability is often seen as trade-offs, whether it's economic trade-off, whether it's to do with time horizon trade-off, whether it's to do with financial or something else, which is kind of a compromise of the user experience. And actually, every one of the solutions that were talked about in the group that we were in was showing a more positive outcome, both from an environmental, customer and impact and actually economic perspective too. So I think it's a really nice way to sort of reframe the narrative. And finally, one thing that was quite interesting was this idea of social capital. So within the community dialogue, how do you make sustainability fun and cool and interesting so that you do get that buy-in across the community? And so often people think of environmental capital, but social capitals could be a driver for sustainability change, and it's something that I'm going to research a little bit more, because I feel like there's probably some interesting kind of academic work out there in this space, but I don't know if many people are applying that to alpine tourism. But I think it could be quite an interesting dynamic looking forward, especially because a lot of these businesses and communities are like family run organizations, and I think there's a lot of research out there around engaging family run businesses and SMEs on sustainability. And yet I don't think this social capital narrative's necessarily been applied to some of those business model solutions that in particular, Danielle, you mentioned come up in your group. So maybe there's some interesting links there, and I think we'll explore that soon and see what we can do there as well. I think thank you so much everyone for putting so many things in the chat as well. I can see that the chat has been really active, and I would encourage you all, in fact I'm going to go back to the slide with it on, but please do join the sorry, I'm just going to try and get it on the screen. Please do join the LinkedIn group and stay connected with everybody. That QR code in the middle there is for the LinkedIn group, and encourage you all to share and participate across. And really thank you so much for everyone for joining today. I think it's been such a fascinating discussion in terms of the diversity of different levers that we've discussed, and also the honesty of the challenges. I think so often people focus on one or the other, and I think with SATI I wanted to bring both of those together. And I think we've all you've all been amazing actually at bringing a very tangible discussion today, and actually sharing lots of examples and sharing lots of best practice.